In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, I've seen grown men tremble, tough women break, and families carry burdens too heavy for their shoulders. If this touches your heart, leave a comment, because what walked into my courtroom that morning started as a simple traffic matter and turned into something I still carry with me. I remember looking down from the bench and seeing a little boy no more than 9 years old standing beside his mother, clutching her sleeve like he was trying to hold her together. And before I could even ask the first question, he looked up at me and said something that made the whole room go still. I've learned over the years that most cases do not arrive in court the way they really happen in life. On paper, they look small. A parking violation, a registration lapse, a missed court date, a fine no one paid because they didn't care, or so it seems. But then the people stand in front of you, and the paper starts to lose its certainty. That morning, the clerk called the matter, and I glanced down at the citation. It involved a vehicle ticketed outside a pharmacy, then a second citation after the court notice was ignored. The total had climbed to an amount that might not mean much to some people, but I've been doing this for 35 years, and I know when a modest sum on paper can feel like a mountain in a kitchen where every bill matters. The mother stepped forward first. She looked exhausted in a way that goes beyond missing sleep. Her coat was neat, but old. Her shoes were clean, but worn at the sides. I notice these things. When you sit where I sit, you learn to read struggle before anyone says a word. Her hands were shaking, though she was trying hard to keep them still. The little boy stood beside her so straight, like he had given himself a job to do. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't distracted. He was on duty. I looked at Inspector Quinn, and he gave me that quiet glance that said, "Judge, there's something here." I said, "Yeah, good morning, what's your name?" She answered softly, almost apologizing for taking up space. I asked the boy his name too, and when he told me, I smiled and said, "You came to court with Mom today?" He nodded. Then I said, "That's a very serious face for a young man. What am I going to do with you?" Usually that gets a little smile. It got one from the courtroom, but not from him. He just looked up at me with those wide eyes and said, "I told her to do it, Judge." The mother immediately turned to hush him, embarrassed, frightened, but I held up my hand. "No, let him speak. Let me ask you something, son. What did you tell her to do?" And that was when the air in the room changed. Before I tell you what he said next, let me tell you something. My friends, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. I've met children in court before. Usually they're nervous, confused, or simply dragged along because there's no babysitter at home. But this boy was different. He had come with a mission. He wasn't looking around at the flags or the officers or the people in the gallery. He was watching his mother, measuring every breath she took, ready to step in front of the blow if one came. And if you're a parent or a grandparent or anybody who has ever loved a child, you know how painful it is to see a little one act older than he should have to act. He said, "I told her to park there because my grandma couldn't breathe." Not loud, not dramatic, just straight. Like a fact he had repeated to himself all morning so he wouldn't get it wrong. I looked back down at the ticket. The location was right outside a pharmacy on Broad Street. The date was in the middle of winter. I asked the mother, "Is that what happened?" Her face fell. She closed her eyes for a second, like she had been holding that truth inside so tightly it hurt. Then she said, "Yes, Your Honor, my mother has asthma and heart trouble. We had just picked up her medicine. She started panicking in the car because she couldn't catch her breath. He told me to stop right there. I ran in to get the inhaler because the other one was empty." Now, a judge hears explanations all day long. Some are true. Some are inventions stitched together on the way to court. So I did what I always do. I slowed down. I looked at the date, the time, the sequence. I asked a few careful questions. "How long were you there?" 5 minutes, maybe less." "Why didn't you contest the ticket?" "I should have, Judge. I know I should have." "Why didn't you?" She hesitated, and I could see shame rising in her face before the words arrived. "Because my mother got worse. Then I missed work. Then I got behind. Then the notice came and I got scared." I've heard that kind of fear. It has a sound to it. It sounds like someone drowning quietly so the children won't hear. The prosecutor had the file open. There was nothing extraordinary in it. No criminal record, no pattern of abuse, just one violation that became two because life piled on top of it. I asked, "And your mother, how is she now?" The woman swallowed. The little boy answered before she could. "She died in March." He said it with the same strange bravery children use when they have been living with adult sorrow too long. The mother's hand reached for him, but this time it was her who needed steadying. There was a murmur in the courtroom. Somebody in the gallery let out a soft breath. I felt my own chest tighten. When I was a young man, my father taught me that dignity is often all poor people have left. My parents were immigrants. They knew what it meant to work hard, to count every dollar, to stretch food, to carry pride in one hand and worry in the other. So when people stood in front of me in trouble, I tried never to strip them of that dignity. I said to the mother, "I'm sorry for your loss." Then I looked at the boy and said, "God bless you for telling the truth." He looked down, and for the first time I saw the child in him, not the soldier, the child. His mouth trembled for half a second before he caught it. Then I asked the question I always ask when I feel the heart of a case is still hidden somewhere below the facts. "Let me ask you something. Why did you bring your son here today?" She answered, "Because he insisted." I turned to him. You insisted?" He nodded. "Why?" He lifted his chin and said, "Because she cries when she opens mail from the court. Now I've presided over a lot of emotional moments. I've seen relief, confession, gratitude, heartbreak. There are times when one plain sentence lands harder than any speech ever could. That was one of those times. The whole courtroom got very quiet. Even Inspector Quinn, who has seen everything, looked away for a second. If you believe in second chances, hit that like button, because what happened next reminded me why mercy is not weakness. I looked at the mother again, and suddenly the ticket wasn't the real issue anymore. The real issue was what kind of burden this family had been carrying, and why this little boy had decided he needed to carry part of it too. I asked her about work. She said she cleaned rooms at a hotel until her mother got sick, then picked up part-time shifts when she could. She had no paid leave, no cushion, no savings to absorb disaster. The ticket had sat on the table for weeks, maybe months, becoming not just money owed, but a symbol of every way life had cornered her. I know that look. People don't always fear the fine. Sometimes they fear what the fine proves. I asked whether she had brought any paperwork about her mother's condition. She looked startled and reached carefully into an old folder she had been clutching against her chest. Inside were pharmacy receipts, a hospital discharge sheet, and an obituary folded more times than paper should be folded. I asked the clerk to hand them up. When I looked at the medical paperwork, I saw the dates lined up with the ticket, not perfectly but honestly. Honest documents are never theatrical. They simply sit there and say, "This happened." The obituary confirmed the grandmother had passed a few months later. I glanced at the mother's name listed among surviving family, and beneath that I imagined the life behind those lines. 3 generations in one apartment, 1 car, 1 emergency, 1 moment that spilled into court months later. I said, "So the ticket happened during a medical emergency, and then you missed the hearing because your life was turning upside down?" "Yes, Judge. And now your son has come here to defend you." She nodded, but she was crying too hard to speak. The boy tugged once at her sleeve and whispered, "It's okay, Ma." The tenderness of that nearly broke me. Children should not have to become comforters to the adults raising them, and yet in hard homes and honest homes pressed by poverty it happens all the time. That's one of the cruel things about hardship. It doesn't just empty wallets. It rearranges childhood. I leaned back for a moment. On the bench, those pauses matter. People think a judge pauses because he is unsure. Sometimes that's true, but sometimes a judge pauses because he wants to give the moment the respect it deserves. I thought of my own mother. I thought of the way my father would walk through weather and pain and humiliation before letting his family feel unsafe. I thought of the thousands of people who have stood before me, afraid not only of consequences but of being misunderstood. Then I thought of this little boy saying, "I told her to do it," as if he could absorb legal blame just by loving his mother hard enough. And I knew this was no ordinary morning. There are judges who see the law as a wall. I have always tried to see it as a structure that must hold, yes, but within it there has to be room for humanity. I try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated if life had pushed me into a corner. That doesn't mean I excuse everything. I don't. Rules matter. Public order matters. Responsibility matters. But mercy matters too. And wisdom matters most when the facts are true but incomplete. I asked the prosecutor whether the city objected to some leniency given the circumstances. He looked at the file, looked at the family, and said, "Your Honor, the city's position is that the violation occurred, but the circumstances appear compelling." That was prosecutor language for judge, I understand. Still, something in me said the story was not finished, so I looked at the boy and said, "Son, when you say you told her to park there, tell me exactly what happened." He took a breath and answered with the careful precision of a child who knows grown-ups only listen if he sounds composed. "Grandma was in the back. She was making noises. My mom was driving around trying to find a place, and I said, 'Just stop.' I said, 'I'll stay with Grandma.' I said, 'Go get it quick.'" He paused. "And then when the man put the ticket there, I saw it. I said, "You saw the officer put the ticket on the car?" He nodded. "And what did you do?" He looked at me with such innocence and pain that I knew whatever came next was going to stay with me for a long time. He said, "I hid it." That was the twist none of us expected. The mother gasped and turned to him. "You what?" He began crying then, quietly at first, trying not to make noise. "I hid it because you were already sad." The courtroom reacted all at once, a hand over a mouth, a little exhale from someone in the back. Even I had to stop for a second because now it made sense. The missed notice, the confusion, the shame. This little boy had seen the ticket, taken it, hidden it somewhere, and kept the secret because in his mind he was protecting his mother. Not out of mischief, out of love, pure panicked 9-year-old love. I said gently, "Did you tell your mother this before today?" He shook his head. "No." "Why not?" "Because then it would still be my fault." There are moments in court when you can feel every person in the room become smaller before the truth of something. This was one of them. I looked at the mother and the shock on her face was mixed with heartbreak and understanding. You could see her piecing together months of confusion. I could almost hear the memory moving through her mind, the missing ticket, the unexplained notice, the child who had been watching her too closely ever since. That's when she started sobbing, not out of anger, but because she realized her little boy had been carrying secret guilt for months. If this touches your heart, leave a comment because I want you to think about what fear looks like in a child. It doesn't always look like tears or tantrums. Sometimes it looks like responsibility. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like a boy standing in a courtroom, prepared to take the blame for a grown woman because he thinks that's what love requires. I have grandchildren. I have children. I know the instinct to protect, but there's something especially devastating when you see it reversed. I know when the young try to shield the old from pain they were never meant to understand. And now I had to decide not only what justice required, but what healing required. The mother bent down and held him. She kept saying, "Oh, baby. No, no, it's not your fault." The boy was crying into her coat, his shoulders trembling. I let them have that moment. In a courtroom, order is important, but so is timing. You don't interrupt a truth when it has finally found the air. After a little while, I said softly, "Take your time." Inspector Quinn handed over a tissue box. The clerk looked away politely. Even the prosecutor lowered his eyes. This is what people don't always understand about courtrooms. Yes, they are places of law, but they are also places where hidden family history sometimes cracks open in public. And if you're fortunate, compassion enters before judgment hardens it. When they had gathered themselves, I asked the boy, "Do you remember where you hid the ticket?" He nodded. "In my backpack, then later in a drawer." The mother gave a sad little laugh through tears. "Your Honor, I found a paper in his drawer weeks later, but it was crumpled up and I didn't know what it was." I said, "That's because sometimes we only understand the meaning of a thing when we know the fear behind it. That's one of the lessons life teaches over and over. Behavior is visible, burden is not. We see what people do. We rarely see what they're trying to survive." I turned back to the citation and thought about what options the law gave me. There are limits to every bench. A judge is not a magician. I cannot undo illness. I cannot restore dead parents. I cannot give a child back the months he spent feeling responsible for adult pain. But I can decide whether the system adds more suffering when there has already been enough. I could see the prosecutor understood that too. I said the underlying violation occurred, but the failure to address it was tied directly to a medical emergency, a family death, and the actions of a child trying to protect his mother. I paused. That matters. Then the boy did something else I never expected. He lifted his face, looked straight at me, and said, "If somebody has to pay, I can." I said, "What are you talking about?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out a little stack of crumpled $1 bills and coins. "This is from helping my neighbor bring groceries." The mother tried to stop him, but he held on to it like it was evidence, like it was his testimony. I can still see that little fist opening over the polished wood, revealing maybe $7 and some change. Not enough to satisfy the fine, more than enough to break your heart. I had to look down for a moment. I'm telling you honestly, my throat tightened. I've had many cases go viral. People know me from Caught in Providence. They see the smiles, the humor, the compassion, the surprising turns. But what they don't always see is how close some moments come to undoing you right there on the bench. I said to him, "Put that money away." He looked confused. "But it's mine." I said, "I know it is, and you earned it, and I'm proud of you. But that's not how this is going to work." He said, "Because I did it." And I answered, "No, son, you loved your mother, that's what you did. Share this if you know someone who needs hope, because I want people to understand that justice without compassion becomes something cold and incomplete." I asked the mother whether anyone had ever explained to her that she might have been able to contest the citation based on emergency circumstances. She said no. She thought once the paper came, it meant the city had already decided who she was. I told her, "A court should decide facts, not identities. You are not this ticket. You are a daughter who is trying to help her mother breathe. You are a working woman who fell behind during grief, and you are raising a son with a very big heart." She started crying again, this time with relief mixed into it. But I still had one concern. Sometimes when a child reveals a secret in public, the truth is only half the issue. The other half is what happens when the family goes home. So I spoke very carefully. I said to the boy, "I want you to hear me. You are not in trouble. Do you understand me?" He nodded. "And your mother is not angry because you got a ticket hidden. She is sad because you were carrying worry all alone." He looked at her then, searching her face for confirmation. She pulled him close and said, "Never alone? Never." You could feel the room breathe again. Those small assurances matter. A child can build an entire world from one sentence spoken at the right moment. I thought of something my father used to say. A person's character is measured by what he does when he sees another person in pain. This boy, in his imperfect, childish way, had tried to act. He had seen fear in his grandmother, pressure in his mother, and he rushed toward responsibility. The problem was not his heart. The problem was that his heart had nowhere age appropriate to put all that love. So it turned into guilt. And now the law had brought that guilt into daylight. I knew I had an opportunity, maybe even an obligation, to send this family home lighter than they arrived. I asked the clerk for the full amount due with all added penalties. It was more than the mother could have paid that week, maybe that month, not enormous to the system, enormous to her. I said to her, "Can you afford this?" She shook her head. "Not without missing rent." I asked, "And if I put you on a payment plan?" She gave me the honest answer. "I would try, Judge, I would. But I'm already behind. There's another thing I've learned in 35 years. A payment plan is not mercy if the payment is still impossible. All it does is stretch fear out over time and call it procedure. The prosecutor, to his credit, did not object when I said I wanted to consider dismissal of the secondary penalties. He understood this was not somebody gaming the system. This was life happening to a family already at the edge. Still, I wanted the boy to understand something important. So I leaned forward and said, "Listen to me carefully. In this courtroom, telling the truth matters. Today you told the truth, and that took courage, but hiding things from your mother is not helping. Do you understand?" He nodded. "Yes, Judge. Good, because strong people tell the truth early. That's what real courage looks like." He absorbed that like medicine. Then I turned to the mother. "And you, my dear, let me ask you something. Who carries the worries in your house?" She gave a tired little smile and said, "Apparently everybody." There was a soft laugh in the courtroom. Sometimes humor is kindness. I said, "No more of that. He gets to be 9. You hear me?" She nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Good, because children are not emergency blankets for adults. They are children." That line stayed with me long after the case ended. It came out of me without rehearsal, but it was true. Too often the poor are forced into roles they never chose, and children feel it first. Before I tell you what I finally decided, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because this was the moment when law had to meet conscience. I looked down at the file one last time. Under ordinary circumstances, the city was entitled to collect. Under ordinary circumstances, adults are responsible for tickets, notices, and consequences. But these were not ordinary circumstances. We had a medical emergency, a death in the family, financial hardship, and a child whose misguided act delayed the process out of fear. The law gave me discretion, and discretion exists for exactly these moments. Not to indulge favoritism, not to reward drama, but to recognize humanity when it stands plainly before you. I said, "Here is what I'm going to do." The room leaned in. I've seen that happen thousands of times. People think they're waiting for a number or a legal formula, but really they're waiting to learn what kind of world they're standing in. I continued, "I am dismissing the penalties and court costs in full." The mother covered her mouth. The boy stared at me. "As for the underlying citation, I am converting it to a warning based on the documented medical emergency and the credible circumstances presented today." The mother burst into tears. The boy whispered, "Really?" I said, "Really?" The gallery broke into that gentle courtroom applause people try to suppress because they know it's not technically allowed. I let up and said, Here, please, for aber for a second. Not long, just enough. Inspector Quinn smiled. The prosecutor nodded. The clerk softened, and I looked at that boy and said words I hope he remembers all his life. Your heart is a beautiful thing, but your job is not to suffer for everyone you love. Your job is to grow, to learn, to tell the truth, and to become the good man you're already trying to be. He stood there frozen, like he had expected punishment and found permission instead. The mother kept thanking me, saying, "God bless you, Judge, God bless you." I told her, "No, God bless you. You came here. You faced it. That takes strength." Then I looked at the boy again. "And God bless you too, young man. But next time you bring your money to court, make sure it's for lunch, not for paying your mother's tickets." The courtroom laughed, and finally he smiled. A real smile. The first one. Not because he thought he had escaped something, but because the weight had shifted off him. You can see when a child returns to childhood, it happens in the face first. I could have ended it there. Many judges would have. Matter resolved. Next case. But I've always believed that a courtroom can do more than dispose of files. It can restore perspective. So I asked the mother if she had support, any sisters, brothers, church community, neighbors. She said not much. Her mother had been the center of the family, and after her death, everything felt scattered. I asked whether the boy was doing okay in school. She hesitated, and the hesitation told me enough. He worries, she said. He watches me all the time. If I'm sad, he notices. If I'm late, he notices. He doesn't sleep well. Of course he didn't. Children who monitor the emotional weather at home rarely sleep deeply. I said, "Let me tell you something, my friends. If this story is moving you, leave a comment, because families like this are all around us, and many of them suffer in silence." Then I turned back to them and spoke from the heart. Grief has a way of appointing people to jobs they never asked for. Sometimes the oldest becomes younger. Sometimes the youngest becomes older. When that happens, a family needs help putting everyone back where they belong. I asked the court officer to connect the mother with some local family support resources after the hearing. Nothing intrusive, just somebody to talk to, maybe school counseling, maybe community help. The mother nodded gratefully. She looked relieved not only by the dismissal, but by being seen. This is where people misunderstand compassion. They think it's about softness. It isn't. Real compassion is honest. It names the hurt, but it also names the responsibility. I told the boy, "You made a mistake hiding that paper." He looked down. I said, "But mistakes are not the end of your story. They're lessons. The important thing is what you do after the truth comes out." He looked up again. I told it. "Yes," I said, "and that matters." Then I offered him my favorite kind of wisdom, the kind children can carry home in their pockets. A good man is not somebody who never makes a mistake. A good man is somebody who tells the truth and learns from it. The mother asked if she could say something. I told her yes. She turned to her son and said, voice shaking, "You never had to fix what was hurting me." That line hit everyone in the room. I felt it all the way through, because that's the sentence so many children deserve to hear, and so few hear in time. He hugged her, and I saw in that embrace the beginning of forgiveness, not only between them, but inside him. There is no greater relief than watching guilt leave a child's body. It's like seeing winter break. In court, the next file was probably already being prepared. Another ticket, another dispute, another life waiting in the hallway. But I wasn't ready to move yet. I said, "One more thing." They both looked up. "Your grandmother would be proud that you cared so much." The boy's face changed immediately. Grief is funny that way. Sometimes children cry harder over the praise than the loss, because praise gives them permission to feel what they've been holding in. Tears started down his face again. I said, "But she would not want you carrying blame that isn't yours." He nodded slowly. That one landed. Hit that like button if you believe justice should leave people better than it found them. That has always been my hope. Not always my result, because judges are human and institutions are limited. But it is my hope. I've often said from the bench that everybody has a story. What I mean is not that every story excuses conduct. It doesn't. What I mean is that if you listen long enough, you find the moral center of the case. And once you find that center, your ruling becomes not just technically correct, but humanly sound. That day, the moral center was not the parked car. It was the love and fear wrapped inside a 9-year-old child. After I resolved the case, they stepped away from the podium, but the boy turned back. He said, "Judge?" I said, "Yes." He asked, "So my mom's not in trouble anymore?" I smiled. "Not in this courtroom." He thought about that carefully. Then he asked, "Can I keep my money?" I laughed and said, "Absolutely. In fact, you better keep it somewhere safe." He gave a solemn nod, like we had concluded a very serious financial arrangement. And then just before leaving, he waved. Not timidly, openly, like a child. That wave did more for me than any thank you speech could have done. When the next case began, I was still carrying that family with me. That happens sometimes. People think judges compartmentalize. Maybe some do. I never entirely could. You learn to continue. Yes, you have to. The docket is long and every person deserves your attention, but certain faces remain in the room even after they've left it. That boy's face stayed with me all day. So did the mother's expression when she realized what he had done and why. There are heartbreaks that come from cruelty, and there are heartbreaks that come from love trying to do more than it can. The second kind is harder for me, because there's nothing to condemn, only something to heal. Later that afternoon, during a brief pause, Inspector Quinn came near the bench and said quietly, "That was a tough one." I nodded. "Yes, it was." He said, "Kid's got a big heart." I said, "Too big for 9. Quinn gave me that half smile of his. He knows. He's watched these moments unfold beside me for years. Court staff see human nature in concentrated form. They know when a story is manipulative, when it's exaggerated, and when it's genuine. And this one was genuine. There had been no performance in that child, only confession. That's why it hit so deeply. Months passed, cases came and went, seasons changed. I went on doing what I've always done, listening, weighing, deciding, trying to preserve the dignity of the people before me. Then one day a letter arrived at court, handwritten, simple envelope, nothing official about it. The clerk brought it to my attention because my name was on it. Inside was a thank you note from the mother. She wrote that after court she sat with her son in the car for a long time. They both cried. Then they went to get ice cream, not because they could really afford it, but because she wanted to mark the day something heavy had ended. She wrote that her son slept through the night for the first time in weeks. I had to pause when I read that. People talk about justice in grand terms, precedent, policy, enforcement, deterrence. Those things matter, but sometimes justice is a child sleeping through the night because a burden he never should have carried has been lifted. The letter said she had taken my advice and spoken with his school counselor. He was doing better, still protective, still sensitive, but more like himself. She wrote, "You gave me back my son." No judge truly gives something like that. Families do the hard work. Healing does the slow work. But if the court can remove one stone from the load, that matters. She also wrote something else that I have never forgotten. She said, "He keeps repeating what you told him. Strong people tell the truth early." I smiled when I read that. Imagine, out of all the things said that day, that was what stayed with him. Not the legal ruling, not the dismissed fines. A moral sentence, a piece of guidance. That's why I have always believed the bench is not merely a chair of authority. It is also, when used properly, a place of stewardship. Your words can follow people home. So choose them carefully, choose them with humility. Choose them as if someone's child may build part of his character around them. If this story means something to you, share it with someone who needs hope. I'm serious about that. There's too much cynicism in the world about courts, about authority, about human beings in general. And yes, some of that cynicism is earned, but there are also moments of grace. There are moments when the system pauses long enough to see the soul of a family. There are moments when accountability and mercy do not compete but cooperate. That day in Providence, Rhode Island, a little boy reminded a courtroom that love can be clumsy, frightened, and still profoundly noble. My job was not to crush that love. My job was to guide it. Often think back to my own childhood when I'm faced with cases like that. We didn't have much. My family knew sacrifice intimately. We understood that grown-ups worried in silence and children noticed anyway. Poverty has many dialects, and one of them is the look children wear when they start listening for trouble before they know the language for it. That boy had that look. I recognized it immediately. Maybe that is why his first words to me pierced so deeply. I told her to do it. A child trying to convert love into liability. A child trying to place himself between his mother and judgment. How could that not break your heart? But here's the thing. A judge cannot rule from a broken heart alone. He must also rule from a clear mind. Compassion without discipline can become sentimentality. Discipline without compassion can become cruelty. The work is in the balance. That's what I hope people understand when they watch me. I don't help people because I ignore the law. I help people because I understand the purpose of discretion within the law. The law, properly administered, should not be blind to hardship. It should be careful with it. A good judge asks not only what happened, but also what didi, fiati, daki, datiti, sferadi. Inquire now. Fairness that day required seeing several truths at once. The mother had made a desperate choice during an emergency. The city had a legitimate interest in enforcement. The misprocess was not pure neglect. It was tangled with grief, poverty, and a child's frightened mistake. The boy needed correction, but tender correction. The mother needed relief, but also reinforcement that truth and support matter. The courtroom needed to witness justice as something wiser than arithmetic, so I did what I thought was right, and to this day I believe it was right. Not because it made people cry, not because it would make good television, but because it was faithful to both law and conscience. I've had people ask me over the years, Judge, do you ever get tired of carrying these stories? The answer is yes and no. Yes, because I am human, I feel them, I always will. And no, because the day I stop feeling them is the day I should step away from the bench. Compassion is not a distraction from the judicial role. It is one of the instruments by which justice is tuned. Not the only one, but an essential one. You can't weigh a life properly if you refuse to feel its gravity. That boy taught me that again, in a way I will never forget. There was another detail in the mother's letter. She said that on the ride home from court, her son asked whether judges ever get sad. She told him she didn't know. Let me answer that now. Yes, we do. At least I do. I get sad when I see children burdened too soon. I get sad when poverty turns ordinary mistakes into spiraling crises. I get sad when people think a court notice means the government has already decided they are worthless. But I also feel hope. Hope when someone tells the truth. Hope when a parent and child leave with less fear than they arrived with. Hope when a room full of strangers is reminded that mercy is part of justice, not an exception to it. Let me ask you something, my friends. What kind of society do we want to be? One where a 9-year-old empties his pockets to pay for adult pain, or one where adults, institutions included, know when to say, enough, this family has suffered sufficiently? That question lives far beyond one courtroom in Providence. It lives in schools, hospitals, city halls, homes. It lives wherever people have power over people with less power. And if my years on the bench have taught me anything, it is this: authority reveals character. The way you use your power tells the truth about who you are. I remember the exact sound of the mother's relief when I dismissed that matter. It wasn't loud. It was almost like the body remembering how to exhale. I remember the boy's coins shining under the courtroom lights. I remember Inspector Quinn's face. I remember the gallery wiping tears. I remember myself thinking, not for the first time, that some of the most important cases in life never appear important at first glance. A parking ticket, a missing notice, a child with a secret. That's how it looked from the outside, but from the bench with the whole story revealed, it became a lesson about grief, dignity, truth, and the sacred duty of protecting childhood whenever we can. You know, people sometimes call me soft. That's all right, I understand why. They see me wave a fine, offer a kind word, listen longer than expected. But softness is not what guides me. Conviction does. I am convinced that many people who come before the court are not bad people. They are people in difficult moments. They need accountability sometimes. They need correction sometimes. But often they also need someone in authority to say, I see the whole person standing there. That is not softness. That is moral clarity. And it takes courage too, because it is easier to hide behind rules than to apply them wisely. There are 5 things I wish everyone watching could remember from that day. First, truth heals slower when it hides, but it heals best when it comes out. Second, children will often volunteer to carry pain that belongs to the adults they love, so guard them. Third, hardship can make small mistakes look enormous, so do not judge too quickly. Fourth, mercy is strongest when it is anchored in facts, not fantasy. And fifth, no one should leave a courtroom feeling smaller than when they entered unless their conduct truly requires it. Those are not legal doctrines, they are human ones. But good judging depends on human wisdom as much as legal knowledge. I still see that boy sometimes in my mind as he first stood there, rigid with responsibility. Then I see him at the end waving on his way out, a little more like a child again. That transition mattered more to me than the dismissal itself, Because what is the point of compassionate justice if it does not restore something? I couldn't restore his grandmother. I couldn't erase the months of guilt. But maybe I could interrupt the lesson he was starting to learn. The dangerous lesson that love means paying for everyone else's suffering. No, love tells the truth. Love shows up. Love helps. But love is not self-condemnation. Before we part, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, because these moments remind us what justice can look like at its best. And if this touched your heart, leave a comment, because I'd like to know whether you think I did the right thing. Tell me what you would have done if you were in my chair that day, looking at that child, that mother, those crumpled dollars on the bench. Would you have ruled differently? Would you have found another way? These are not abstract questions. They go to the center of how we see one another. As for me, I carry the answer I gave then and the lesson I received with gratitude. I was reminded that even after all these years, after all the files and faces and stories, I can still be surprised by the depth of a child's heart and the fragility of a family trying to survive. I was reminded that my parents were right. Dignity matters, family matters, kindness matters. And I was reminded that every once in a while, behind an ordinary citation, there waits a moment that reveals the whole purpose of the bench. So I'll leave you with this. A courtroom should be a place where truth is welcomed, where pain is respected, where responsibility is taught, and where mercy is never ashamed of itself. That day, a 9-year-old came to take all the blame for his mother. He left knowing he did not have to, and I left the bench that afternoon thanking God for letting me serve long enough to witness a moment like that. Take care of yourself. Take care of your families. Protect your children from burdens that do not belong to them. And God bless you all. But I'll tell you this much, as unforgettable as that day was, nothing prepared me for what walked into my courtroom next.